Welcome to Leaders of Life Sciences, the podcast where we spotlight the people shaping the future of pharma and biotech. Each episode, we speak with founders, senior execs, scientists, and strategists about how they lead, what drives them, and the real impact they're making on teams, organizations, and the lives of patients. If you want fresh insight into what great leadership looks like in life sciences, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome on Tracy Rockney here today. Tracy is a national expert in US pharmaceutical labeling and FDA promotional review, and she's built a successful career at companies including AbbVie, Pfizer, Wyeth Pharma and Shire Pharma before founding and later selling OneSource Regulatory. Tracy founded OneSource in 2015, and it was the first consulting and technology company specializing in pharmaceutical industry regulatory strategy and compliance. And she grew the company to $12.3 million in revenue and $4.2 million in EBITDA, and then sold to Pharma Group. She's held board roles on 4 early stage pioneering regulatory specific solutions, data insights and marketing companies. She's mentored founders, CEOs, rising female execs, advised on startup business strategy. So an incredible voice to have on here on the podcast, the first one in exploring successful leaders in life sciences. And so it is my pleasure to welcome you on, Tracy. Great to have you. What part of what I just went through gives you the biggest sense of pride?
Oh, gosh, there's so much. I've had a really great career. I remember when I was the youngest one in this industry, like many years later. I can't believe now I'm at the stage where I'm at, where I'm not the youngest one anymore. But, for me, I think the thing that gives me the most pride was the courage to walk away from my job at AbbVie back in 2015. I mean, I had an amazing job there. I loved it. I wasn't unhappy. But I was really passionate about starting a company, One Source Regulatory. I didn't come from a family of entrepreneurs. In fact, I had a very blue collar upbringing. My dad was a conductor on the Long Island Railroad. I'm from New York. My mom was a hospital secretary. And, sometimes I have to pinch myself and go, wow, look at all that you've accomplished. But I think it really went to my mindset, this growth mindset. And it's just really exciting for me to be here. So thank you so much for allowing me to share my story and hopefully emboldening others to do some amazing things.
Absolute pleasure. Excited to share it. And we're going to cover some really interesting topics here for the listeners, including what it takes to go on and be a successful leader within the industry, what it takes or what it took for you to kind of build and sell, and what post-exit life was like, and the kind of advice you'd give to people to kind of get ahead in their career now and make a real success of it. So you've had an impressive journey from leading in big work, well recognized businesses, managing multinational teams, selling a business, mentoring, investing, all different kind of realms and aspects of the industry. So can you share a bit about your story and what you feel has been the real kind of drivers for your success?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts out for me about how I grew up. Like I said, I grew up very blue collar, and was fortunate. I mean, I was the first person in my family to go to college. Okay, let alone go to graduate school, go to law school. And so I really feel that there was a lot expected of me. I felt like, it's not like a weight, but I just felt that there were high expectations, and I had those of myself as well. Um, and I think that there's just so many great stories I can share along the way that have just happened to me that I think kind of led me in different directions here and there, and not being afraid to do something that nobody in my family had ever done before. And I was very fortunate. I had great parents growing up. My parents were very supportive of my academic endeavors, of my professional endeavors. And they might not have always understood it, but they were my biggest cheerleaders. And it was exciting to share my story with them. You and I will talk for a while now about like just all the kind of cool things that happened. But I think it was just this. I was very gritty growing up. My dad always called me a hustler. I always had a job. I started working at the age of 12. I delivered the New York Daily News, which was a morning newspaper. So I got up at 4:30 every morning, starting at 12 years old, to deliver the newspaper until I turned 16 and got a job at a supermarket. So I've never not worked.
Nice, nice. Started young, forced
Yeah.
into it. So if you look back and you look at the biggest kind of turning points in your career, and you've mentioned there are some key kind of stories, and I know speaking offline, you've got a bunch of them. What would you say are the kind of key stories and turning points in your career, and the kind of lessons in those moments that kind of inspired you to kick on?
Yeah. No, I mean, one I love to share. So I started my career at SmithKline Beecham Animal Health, which was acquired by Pfizer Animal Health. And I had an amazing boss there. His name was John Horrigan. Johnny lives in Kansas still. Hope he's doing awesome. And he was an amazing boss for me. And I remember there were a couple of incidents, I'll call it, that I had early in my career. Again, I'm a New Yorker and I can be a little brusque. And I remember one day I was walking down the hall with John going to a meeting. He was trailing behind me, and people asked him where he was going. And he said, I'll never forget, he said, I'm just following her to pick up the bodies. And I remember hearing that, and I'm like, that's kind of interesting. I'll have to ask him about that. And about a week later, I said to him, I said, John, I said, you said something last week as we were going into XYZ meeting about you just kind of stand behind me and pick up the bodies. What do you mean? And he says, Tracy says you're super smart. He says, but you've got a style about you. He says, I'll never forget, you need to learn the fine art of telling someone to go to hell so they enjoy the trip. And he said, smile a little bit more, relax a bit. He goes, you're going to do great. And I was in my 20s, mid 20s. And I never forgot that. I never forgot. I mean, I can actually still picture us walking down the hall and him saying that to me. And that was a huge turning point for me, is about how people were receiving me. How was I landing on people? And that was a really big deal for me.
Why was that such a big deal, Tracy? What stuck with you about that?
I think what stuck with me is that I cared about what people thought. Although I wanted to do great work, but I also wanted people to have a great experience working with me. And I looked at how people liked working with John. I mean, he was so well admired, and he had such an interesting style about him. I mean, he did not achieve like the levels of senior vice president or chief something something, but he was just an amazing guy. He was a feedlot veterinarian by training, came into the pharmaceutical industry, and I just admired how people admired him. And that was a big deal for me. He was likable. Okay. And I just thought, I want to do great work and I want to be a great a people leader, but I do want people to like me. I don't want them to just describe it as being, yeah, she was a tough leader. And I amended my style after that. I mean, every day I thought about how I was landing on people. And that's one of the things, especially in the area of pharmaceutical advertising promotion. Not every person who sits on a PRC or MLR, promotional review committee, has a great reputation. The marketing people will go, oh, that was a horrible experience working with that person. And I'm really proud to say that, after all these years in the industry, my commercial colleagues said, I really liked working with her. She was really great. She didn't always tell me what I wanted to hear, but I really liked working with her. I forget, I had a colleague, Troy Hamilton. Hi, Troy. How you doing? I forget, after a meeting one day, he says, I think Tracy just told me to go screw myself, and I think I liked it. And although it was just hysterical, because I just think that how you land on people and how people remember that experience is a big deal. You don't always tell them what they want to hear, but I think how you tell them really matters.
Okay, so on that, so clearly you had a moment where you changed your style, and for anybody listening who maybe feels they come across either a bit abruptly, or they know that they might have a bad reputation in the business, what practically, tangibly, tactically did you change about how you approach people kind of after that moment?
Well, I mean, there were a few other turning points. I'm not saying I always got it right. Okay. Um, in that same company at Pfizer Animal Health, I had the opportunity to go to, it was called Excellence in Speakers Institute. And I went with a bunch of the veterinarians who worked in the field. And it was probably one of the best classes I ever took in my career, but it helped me refine that way about how I was delivering. So it was like 3 days of intensive giving presentations. And at the end of it, they had you stand in front of a camera. And I'll never forget the feedback because it was so helpful to me. They said, first of all, Tracy, when you're presenting, have a plant in the audience that smiles at you because it helps you smile when you present. Okay. So I could tell you throughout my career, I would, as I was giving big presentations, small presentations, I'd ask somebody to smile at me so that I would remember to smile back. And it softened I was how I was being received. And so for me, I mean, I think it became natural over time. Those first few years, I think it was tough, and I had to be very intentional and thinking before a meeting. Okay, I have to deliver this news. How am I going to do it in a way that people think I care, and that I'm not being mean about it? So I really had to work hard at it until it became natural, to where I stopped thinking about it. But I would say there were probably 3 or 4 years there where I had to think very specifically before a meeting. I have to give this particular news on this regulatory topic. Okay, it's not the news they're going to want to hear. So, how am I going to make them feel as if I heard them and I analyzed this situation every which way? And so it was a lot of practice. By the way, work on my own before I went to a meeting so that when I got there, I was being received the way I wanted to be received.
Interesting. It's interesting because when you get this, what could be perceived as negative feedback from somebody like John, for example,
Mhm.
saying, picking up the bodies, you could take that one of two ways, right? You could take that and feel, awful about it, or you can take it and change something going forward. And actually, it's really valuable getting this kind of, quote unquote negative feedback, useful feedback to go to kind of take forward and change your style. Is there any advice you'd give to people in how they receive that kind of feedback from people? So let's say you got that piece
Mhm.
of feedback from John, like how you receive that and then how you take that forward to kind of improve what you're doing going forward.
It's hard because naturally we all want to be defensive, right? We're like, wait a minute, I didn't do anything wrong. So it's not easy. And I think, it's helpful that I was maybe at an early stage in my career, and I had someone who was honest. He was not, look, this is not something that showed up in a performance review. He cared about me. Okay. So that was the other thing. At the end of the year, that didn't show up in a performance review. He was having a genuine conversation with me about how people were receiving me, and I wanted to fix it. It was something I really cared about. I had a long career in front of me, and I think when I think about that in practice, I had a situation at a pharmaceutical company where I was a leader and a pretty large team reporting into me. And I had a staff member who over time had received a lot of feedback from a lot of different managers that was not necessarily positive, but he was not improving. And I can tell you when I became his leader, he was really, really struggling. And I remember I sat him down one day, and I said, Bob, here's the things I want to go over with you. And initially he said to me, he was quite upset. He goes, "This is not the feedback I've received from other managers." And now, before this, I had actually gone to his other managers and talked to them because I'm like, there's no way that this guy has not had problems. That his past performance appraisals were not reflecting what I was seeing. Now, what I heard from the other managers was that we were afraid to give him the feedback because we didn't think he could receive it properly. We were afraid of being accused of discrimination. So they weren't giving him honest feedback. And so I said to this gentleman, I said, I'm going to tell you the feedback I got directly from the managers, and that they did not give you honest feedback because they were afraid of being accused of discrimination. He was stunned. Okay. But I said, look, here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to fix. I'm going to work with you on it. It's not a pip. I said, I feel bad that no one's been honest with you over many, many years. And he left my office and he came into work for a couple of days. And he came in, it was like 4 or 5 days later. He came into my office. He says, "Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Of course." So he sits down to talk to me and he says, "So I went and I talked to my grandmother about the feedback you gave." And he says, "She told me I should thank you." And I said, "Oh," he says, and that he goes, "I am angry that the past managers never talked to me about this because it's something I could have fixed had somebody been honest with me." And, we worked through it. And again, it didn't show up in some performance appraisal. We worked together and he had a really wonderful career. I mean, he reported to me for about a year, and I moved on to a different role. But he had honest feedback and honest help in helping him achieve what it is that he wanted to achieve.
I think this is a really useful shift for leaders that are listening to this as well,
Mhm.
and the importance of giving that feedback. Like you're actually doing, if providing you do it in the right way, you're actually doing the person on the other end a favor. Like you're helping them, providing that it's framed in the way that it's to develop their career. It's because you're hearing this feedback externally. You are giving them this insight and this feedback from other people so they can get better, not to step on them or put them down. And so I think that framing as a leader makes it much easier to start having those difficult conversations with people as well, because they're valuable for them. They're integral for their growth.
And you should do, by the way, you should do it right away. I mean, what kills me is people who wait till the end of the year to give them the first feedback of something. Let's say you're giving them the feedback in December, but it was something that happened back in January and February. Why did you wait? So, my leadership style also became to address issues when I saw them. Okay. I remember I had this one guy who was reporting into me. We had a meeting in my office. We had a couple of execs in the office. And I was always very inclusive of making sure even some of my more junior staff had exposure to senior management in key meetings because, nothing's worse than promoting somebody and then giving them exposure when they're not ready. I'd like to get people ready and include them in meetings, big meetings early on so they can kind of practice, if you want to call it that. But I had this gentleman in a meeting and he wasn't reading the room. Okay. And the meeting didn't go exactly as we would have liked and as he had intended. And at the end of the meeting, I remember I said to him, I said, "Hey, why don't you hang back for a little bit?" And, so he hung back. And I looked at him, I said, "So how do you think that went?" And we had a really long discussion about it. I said, "Well, here's what I would have done different. Here's why." We talked about it. And I said, "And the particular executive we had in the room," I said, "Look, this particular executive," I said, "he likes to be briefed by his staff before he gets to a meeting." I said, "And he felt dumb in front of you," I said, "because you didn't brief his team in advance." And I said, "We talked about this in advance." I said, he goes, "Well, but he should be ready." I said, "I'm not saying I don't agree with you and that this guy should not have been ready to handle it. He's an executive." I said, "But if you know the different people and the different personalities, he requires to be briefed by his staff. So therefore, you got to brief his staff before he gets to the meeting because that's what he likes." And I said, sometimes we just have to accommodate different people and different personalities. And again, it was funny at the end of the year. He came to me and goes, "Well, that wasn't on my performance review." I said, "Why would I put it on your performance review?" So like people are so shocked that I did that, but I'm like, I'm not keeping score. I'm trying to give you real-time feedback so that you can improve. Look, I have a philosophy. If I hire somebody and they're not performing and they have to be released from the company, I have accountability in that. I have a lot of accountability in that.
Uh-huh.
But that's just me. Not every manager feels that way. But if I'm not if I'm not mentoring them appropriately or giving them feedback appropriately and they're failing, I had a role in that. But not every leader feels that way.
100%, 100%. And we're there to, as leaders, you're there to, facilitate people's growth. It's not. Don't get me wrong. I do have a strong belief that people should take ownership for their own career, their own future, their own growth. But at the same time, we are there to fill in the gaps for people as leaders. It's to
Yeah.
facilitate, point out blind spots, all of those kind of things. You can't grow and you can't get that development unless you're getting that external feedback along the way.
Yeah.
But one thing that has come to mind, Tracy, is the difference for you between what was leading like in the kind of corporate world for you, and then what was it like as a founder and as a leader of your own business, which obviously you went on, grew and sold. Like, what did you find were the key kind of differences between the two for you?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So, I mean, it's very different. So let's just start there, right? I mean, first off, when we started One Source, my partner and I funded the first year. Okay. I
Okay.
mean, before we built up, we had to build up operating capital. So I personally funded our first year. Okay. So, because you have to wait for clients to pay you. But that being said, I mean, hiring people, it was different, right? Because I was hiring not only consultants to work in our consulting practice, but I was also hiring operating staff to help operate the business. Okay. That is completely different than hiring within pharma. Okay. First off, for the majority of my career, I've worked in really large pharmaceutical companies. And so when you're hiring people to not really help you build a lot of infrastructure. You're hiring them to work in an already existing enterprise, right? So Whether I was hiring at AbbVie, hiring at Pfizer, Shire, or Wyeth, right? I was hiring people for their expertise, okay, and really looking to hire amazing people. But please don't get me wrong, and we'll talk about that because there are some lessons I learned over the years about the types of people I wanted to hire when I was in industry that would benefit my growth in industry in the long run. That was different how I started thinking about things early in my career. But hiring when you have your own business, every penny mattered. I mean, it was interesting after leaving industry, and all of a sudden it was my money. Okay. And it kept me up at night making sure I was hiring the right people. And look, sometimes we got it wrong. Early on, we made some mistakes thinking we needed to hire, from an operations perspective, more experienced pharmaceutical people who maybe had more experience in operations. Well, we come to find out that what we really needed were some people who just knew how to roll up their sleeves, younger people who were comfortable with technology and who were honestly willing to give us feedback that we needed. So I can tell you, our head of operations, our chief operating officer at OneSource, we gave her permission to give us feedback that was not always pleasant about how we were running the business. But we wanted that because we wanted to run a really efficient, high performing business that would be sellable in a number of years. And we achieved that. But that was not without a lot of mistakes along the way. Hiring consultants is different than hiring a staff member in a pharmaceutical company. In a pharmaceutical company, you're not tracking your hours the way you do in a consulting firm. So, when we were hiring people into OneSource, I was taking people who were from industry. We desperately needed their industry expertise, please, as regulatory people. So don't get me wrong, we needed that expertise. But we also had to teach them about the billable hour and how every hour of the work that they're doing matters and is billable. So it's finding people who have that right mindset and go, wait a minute, okay, I understand how to do that, and I want to do that. Some people go, you know what? I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a part of that. And that's great. And we had to learn how to find those people through the interview process, not hire them and go, wait, this is not a fit for us. So it's a completely different model.
One thing I've heard from clients in the past is this ability to realize that the employees don't have the same, and wouldn't be expected to have the same mentality towards your business as you have towards your business, right? Which must have also been a change for you, going from sort of corporate world to your own business. Like now it's not that you switch off at whatever time you switch off and it leaves you, it's there with you at night as well, right? As you've said, some kind of sleepless nights. So how did you find that balance between essentially going from being a business owner and then also having to recognize that it's your baby, not theirs? Like, did you find there was any, was that difficult for you? Was it difficult in how you led differently?
I think what we had to discover was, how do we incentivize people to care about the outcome? Okay, about what we were looking to achieve. And look, here's the thing: when you hire employees, at the end of the day, as they should be selfish about the money they're making. They have families to feed. Okay, so I mean, the truth of the matter is, they're not going to care about your business the same way you're going to care about your business. You can do everything you want. You can put in incentives to say, help us grow the business, and all kinds of different things. But at the end of the day, they are their own entity. They have their family, they have college to pay for, they have daycare to pay for, whatever stage in life that they're in. And so they're just not going to care the same. Okay. Now, I will tell you, at OneSource, I mean, we did have a stock equity plan for employees that provided to the growth of the business. Okay. So, a lot of our consultants didn't necessarily have stock, but those that were helping us grow the underlying operation, business development, and growing the business, they did. They had a stake in getting us to our endpoint, and they did really, really well. But our employees did well as well. We thought of really innovative compensation models to really make them want to work hard. We had such a model. It was before COVID that we started the business. So, I mean, we were one of the first completely remote companies. I mean, we never had a corporate office. Okay. Everybody worked from home from day one. Okay. And so that was easy for us to attract employees. We also let people work part time. We have there are a number of fabulous professional women that I know who maybe had a baby later in life, and they're like, I don't want to give up my career, but at the same time, I don't want to work full time anymore. And Pharma's not letting me job share. Okay. And we gave really innovative options for people to where they didn't feel like they had to give up their career just to have a family. Or we've had, people who are later in their career who they're not really ready to retire, but they don't want to work full time anymore. So we took people as they were and brought them into the fold and compensated them very well. And, our innovative compensation models, I think, are what part of what made us bring in people or allowed us to bring in people who really cared.
Awesome. Awesome. I've heard some people talking about the compensation models shifting in the market. Like, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I think they're going to have to. Now, I mean, look, here's one thing I didn't care about before when I was in pharma, but I surely cared about as owning a firm: utilization. And, are you able to bill for every hour that you're working? I mean, we care about utilization in consulting. That's reality. And teaching people to care about that, that's hard. I think pharma is going to start to care about that in house. And even if they don't, I think there's a whole new generation coming through that doesn't necessarily always want to work full time, and that maybe they would be open to an hourly compensation model if they could have the flexibility, more flexibility in their life overall. I mean, I know a lot of people think post COVID, all remote models are going to go away. I'm not convinced of that. I think that you'll have a hybrid. I think, you'll have to go into the office periodically. And I think it's important early on in your career to get the right kind of mentorship. But I also think you can get mentorship remotely via video and talking to people. And so I think every company's going to have to just remain creative to attract some of the best talent. I think just saying, well, you must be in the office every day. Look, I did horrible commutes early in my career. There are people who look at me and go, oh my gosh, you commuted from the suburbs of Philadelphia to New York City for 2 years? Yeah, I did. Okay. It was 2.5 hours one way. If I was lucky, 2.5 hours home. It was horrendous. And after September 11th, I went, I'm done, and found a local job. But the point is that I've even had long driving commutes. I was going an hour one way, my husband was going an hour in the other direction, and we did it. We had to pay our dues. I just don't see uh, that is necessary anymore. I don't think it's great for the environment. Um, but, I just don't know if we have a generation of people who are going to be on board with that, nor do I think they should be on board with that. I don't think that's really good for a family. I don't think it's good for an individual. I don't think it's healthy. Um, so I think there's going to be some mixed models, and I think they're going to have to remain mixed. Um, you'll still have some in person, which I think is absolutely necessary, key meetings and things of that nature. And I think there's going to be some jobs that are perfectly fine, fully remote as well. So, I mean, I get excited about the future for that kind of stuff. I think I think it's good.
Yeah, we're hearing so much more around like fractional roles,
Yeah,
contract models, and given the talent shortage in life
yeah.
science, it makes sense for different models to kind of come into play. You mentioned there about the future and what excites you about the future. What are the things that looking forward for the industry? Like what are you excited about for the industry and where it's going?
Yeah. I mean, I think first off, I mean, we've got to make sure that there is a next generation really ready to take over the responsibilities. I remember being that next generation coming up and having really great mentorship. And I think that we've got to make sure that the next generation is really ready to take on these huge responsibilities. It was really interesting for me. Like, I came up, I mean, I'm an early Gen Xer. And so I came up when technology was evolving. And I'm an early technology adopter. I love technology, right? So for me, I got to see all of this happen in my career. And throughout my career, as I was doing my work, how I worked was changing every year. Okay, I remember when email went in. I remember when the internet got turned on my computer at work many years ago, but it's really not that many years ago. Things have evolved very quickly. I think that, the young folks that are coming through today, I think, technology, AI, there's going to be more expectations of you. I don't think less. I mean, a lot of people, I think that, oh, with AI we're going to have less jobs, maybe in some areas, but I actually think I think it should mean we can be smarter and do so much more. And so I get excited about that because, I mean, I know I'm an AI adopter. I use as much as I can, and I sit there and I think to myself, I'm doing so much more meaningful work now because I'm not having to do so many operational tasks, that I can do a lot more meaningful research and things that I enjoy doing because of the new technology that's out there. And I feel like I can do more, not less. So I think that, you know, the expectation of this younger generation is not that you're doing less, you're going to do more because you're going to adopt the technology that's out there to help you do more.
Interesting. Where's it really made a difference for you in your life
Mm.
so
Well,
far?
oh my God. Well, think about it. I mean, I ran a company for 6.5 years off of an iPad. Okay. I mean, think about that, right? I mean, I don't have to have a tower sitting on my desk. I mean, I had the ability to, take my job on the road anytime, and I still do anytime that I want. I mean, we could, in starting a business, we were able to adopt really great high technology, low cost solutions that were really made for small business. Um, and really have a really simple operation that was not overly burdensome from a cost perspective or a staff perspective to have in place. Um, I mean, I think it's phenomenal. I was reading an article earlier today. I haven't finished it yet, but it was talking about how solopreneurs, I mean, people now can do by themselves 10 times what people could do with a full staff with technology. So I get excited for people. I'm like, I know people with everything that's going on in the world right now and tariffs and the economy and everything. I'm like, start a business right now. Okay. Go observe problems in the world and start a business. Don't wait.
Okay, why are you so passionate about that? Why is that the I can even see it on your face here how much
Yeah.
you back that and
Yeah.
believe in that. So why does that light you up so much?
I mean, for me, I get excited about starting businesses because I look at what we achieved in 6.5 short years. And sometimes I kick myself and say, gosh, I wish I would have done it sooner, right? I mean, I quit my job at AbbVie. I was 47 when I left. Okay. So, it's not just for the 20 somethings. Okay. If you're in your 30s, if you're in your 40s, um, and a lot of people are scared to do it because they think, I've got these family responsibilities. People are depending on me. I know. I mean, I've got three children, two adult children, and I have a 16-year-old right now. But at the time I started One Source, my older kids were younger. My other daughter, my youngest daughter, was just finishing kindergarten. And I was the primary breadwinner. And there were a lot of expectations in my home around me. But my husband was on board. He's a mechanical engineer. He had a great career. But he was really on board with what I wanted to do. And I think we always lived below our means. So it made it easier for me to quit my really big job. I mean, I was well compensated, I wasn't unhappy. But, I think I shared with you.
That's a brave move, right? Especially when I think the hardest bit from my experience having worked for myself in the past is even if you're not unhappy, what is the thing that prompts you to move? Because you're putting yourself into a really tough situation going and starting your own
Yeah.
thing, right? And a scary situation. So yeah, what was made you make that decision or help you make that decision at that
Yeah.
point?
Yeah, it was really interesting because I'd been taking notes for years, sitting in my job every day. And I think there were really two things that happened for me. One, I remember I had a really bad case of imposter syndrome. Like I felt like I didn't belong for a really long time. Growing up as this blue collar girl, and then I'm in the room with all these MDs and PhDs, and yeah, I have a law degree, but I just didn't feel smart for a long time. And I remember I was at AbbVie and I was sitting in a really large management meeting, and there was a moment that happened for me, and I went, "Wait a minute, they're not smarter than me. I deserve to be here." And it was a moment. I mean, I'm not going to give names or anything, but there was a moment I went, "I belong." And I was about 42 years old at the time. And then it was early on when I had joined Abbott AbbVie, and then the other thing was that, I've been thinking about leaving for a couple of years. And I remember asking myself two questions. Okay. Would I regret leaving? I made great money. Okay. Phenomenal money. I had an amazing team. I had a great boss. I was not unhappy. Okay. But then I asked myself the next question, which was, would I regret staying? And I knew I would regret staying and not trying to do what I believed in, which was start One Source Regulatory. And I knew in the pit of my stomach, I was like, if I stay, my soul's going to die. I really felt that strongly. And I was like, I got to go
Okay.
do this. I felt it in my soul. And I remember when I walked in, it was funny. I walked in to quit my job. So I went in to quit my job. Okay. I went in to go see my boss, Ron. And I remember I had put a bunch of tissues in my pocket because I thought I was going to start to cry. And I walked in and I told him that I was going to leave. And he's like, "You do know how much money you make, right?" And he's like, "I mean, you're really sure you want to do this?" I never cried. I couldn't keep the smile off my face. It was the right thing. And I gave him like 3 months notice, plenty of time to, kind of hire a backfill. And I'm like, I have recommendations for who you should put into the role. If you want to go external, here's what I think you should look at. If you want to go internal here, I had a whole plan. I mean, I was committed. I was doing it. And it was great. It
I
was the
love it.
best decision that I ever made.
I know we touched on this earlier around the sort of traits that you looked for. So if we think of when you actually started building the business and the kind of
Yeah.
traits that you wanted the people to kind of join you and help you on that journey. And the reason I asked this question, I think, is for people growing and leading a team, what to look for in terms of the
Mhm.
traits. And then for people that are really set on making a success from their career, the traits they need to exhibit to help, because ultimately if you're going to be successful, I remember hearing this, you want to make the life of the person above you easier, right? And so that's your job, being a good part of a team, if you like, an effective part of the team. So what are the kind of traits that you look for, you'd advise leaders to look for, and you'd advise people to exhibit as they go through their career?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's whether you have your own company or being in pharma. Okay. Part of it is you need to have a plan for yourself and understand that, first of all, your career is not going to necessarily be a ladder. It might be a jungle gym, meaning sometimes you're going to have to go side to side. You might step down a little bit to get the breadth of experience that you professionally really need in order to be a really great leader. So don't be afraid to take that lateral move. Don't be afraid to do something completely different. Okay. Because you're going to grow from the experience, and you'll grow whether it was, I don't think of things as mistakes. I think of them as growth opportunities, and I've never looked at things in that way. So I mean, I think that's the first thing. You have to say, what is it that I'm looking to achieve in my career? Now, with that, in hiring people, and I learned this. I had a really great job at Shire. And I was known as the expert in advertising and promotion, and that was good for me, but it was also bad for me. And I'll tell you why. Because I was needed too much in the role that I was in, so that when leadership was looking for people for other growth opportunities, they viewed me as being needed too much in the role that I was in. So I therefore didn't get thought of for other growth opportunities that I would have liked. Okay. And, but that's part of your growing yourself and growing your career and recognizing that. So I know when I took the job at Abbott AbbVie, I was very intentional in how I hired people and how I mentored people, and even on the things that I did. So, I made sure, number one, always hire people that are smarter than you, that are greater experts. And some people go, "Well, why would you do that?" I'm like, they want to be the expert. I want to be a great leader. I don't want to be a great expert anymore. And so that was a real turning point for me in my career. I didn't want to be a great expert anymore. I know in my intro, you were like, I was, a national expert in labeling and advertising. That's true, but I don't consider myself that anymore. I consider myself, a leader, an entrepreneur, but I didn't want to be the expert anymore. I wanted to be a leader. And so that meant I had to step away and let everybody on my team be the expert. So I was like, even if, I'll give you an example, like in promotional review committee meetings, you have things called elevations. Okay. When marketing and the review committee might not agree on a particular topic, so you need to elevate it to leadership. So I was that leader it got elevated to, but I was very intentional. I always brought my director, senior director into the meetings with me. And I'm like, well, what's your opinion? And I was very intentional on pushing decision making to them and actually letting them be be that person. I knew for me that if I was going to grow as a leader, I had to give up being an expert so that I could continue to grow. And it really played out well for me when I was at AbbVie. I had an opportunity, and this is my other thing is, with leadership, be careful what you ask for. You might get it. Um, I really wanted to grow my role. I was heading up US advertising, and global labeling. And I was really interested in the policy and intelligence area. And an opportunity came up where there was a gentleman who was looking to retire in the group. And I went to my boss and I said, I'd like that job. And 2 weeks later, he came back to me and he said, he's like, okay. He says, well, what do you have to give up in order to do that? Because you're an expert here and here. I said, I've already got my team in place. I don't need to give up anything. So I wound up, getting it added onto my role, not having to give up other parts of my job because again, I'd done what I had intended to do 2 to 3 years before that, which was make sure I'm not seen as needed in those very specific roles so that I could grow as a leader. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 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 definitely, definitely. Yeah, I was having a similar conversation earlier about the difference between being the specialist, being the expert, and being the leader, and how, in fact, the more senior you go and the more almost generalized you become, the more you have to lean on your experts to make those decisions because actually you are more removed from it. So
Yeah.
it's not a decision for you to make, which does mean that there's an ego hit with that for some people as well, right?
There can be, but for me, I gladly gave it up because I saw by remaining the expert what I was giving up and I didn't want to give up, which was leadership. So for me, it was really easy to give up. And then, when we started One Source, I will say that, you know, number one, I had to hire people that were smarter than me in so many different areas, right? I mean, as a business owner, an entrepreneur, you have to really put your ego on the shelf because there's just a lot you don't know. And I'd never run a business before. Okay. So every day I learned something new, but I hired other people to run the practice of, managing all the staff who were doing all of our review, medical, legal, regulatory review. I hired other people to do that. Number one, I didn't want to do it anymore. Okay. I wasn't interested in doing it anymore. I wanted to build a company. And so you can't, so like, for example, I didn't do any of the consulting work. Okay. A lot of people say, well, how many hours did you spend consulting? I didn't. Okay. I was doing business development. I was growing the business because my business partner, prior to us joining together and starting One Source, he'd had a small practice. And in that small practice, he was doing all the work all the time. And he said, like, he used to joke, he says, to the great lifestyle business, he goes, my family has a great lifestyle while I'm traveling around. And it's just, that's the truth, right? And so I wanted to build something meaningful. I wanted to build a really amazing business, but I wasn't going to do that if I was spending countless hours doing billable work.
So if you were advising somebody in the industry now, what is the one thing that you tell them to focus on in order to stand out?
Well, and I think this is a generational shift, but I would say, first of all, be comfortable paying your dues. I do see a lot of younger people who are coming up through the industry who don't necessarily think they have something to learn from a mentor or their elders, if you want to call it that. Um, and I think it's important to swallow your pride a little bit and learn this is a complex industry. Every role, not just regulatory, every role in this industry, it's complex. There's a lot of history, there's a lot of science, there's a lot of regulation, a lot of guidance documents, and it's global and every country is different. So you need to take your time and learn. I see a lot of people, especially in consulting, like especially, owning a consulting practice and looking out. There's a lot of younger people with not a lot of experience leading. And I'm not saying they're not good leaders, but they don't have the depth of experience. And leading can be hard when you don't have the history of the depth of experience. So I had that depth of experience. People were no longer expecting me to remain the expert, but I had a history of being the expert, and it brought a lot of credibility. So I think that they get excited. But I mean, I'm seeing people that took 20 years to become a director, and then I see other people where in 3 years they're expecting to be a director, and I'm like, slow your roll, take your time, learn the job, become an expert. Do become an expert, learn from other people, um, and your time will come. And look, not everybody wants to be a people leader. I think that's also important to figure out. Sometimes you want to be a domain expert, but you don't want to be a people leader. And be clear about that. It's not for everybody. I see a lot of really great people. My husband's one of those people. He loves really interesting projects as an engineer, but he didn't like people leadership. It just wasn't his thing. He didn't want to do it. Rewarding him for a great project was not promoting him to manage a team. It would have been giving him a more interesting, complex project to work on. That would have been way more rewarding for him. And so I think we make that mistake in a lot of companies, not just pharma, but in pharma as well, where we reward people with leadership roles to manage people when that's probably not the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's an entirely different skill set.
Yeah.
Entirely different skill set.
And
And a
some
lot of
people are
people go
super
into
uncomfortable with it.
yeah, a lot of people go into management roles because they were good at their job, not because they're good at leading people.
That's
And the
right.
development of that skill set is tough.
Yeah. And look, I've worked for some really bad leaders and I've worked for some really great leaders. And the great ones were not necessarily domain experts, but they were really great people leaders. And I loved working for them. And and honestly, they were comfortable, they were confident. And that made a huge difference. When you're working for somebody.
Tracy, you're onto new things now. Changes happening your end. What excites you most about your next phase?
Yeah. So at the end of 2024, I left Pharma, left my leadership role, leading the practice. Pharma was the company that acquired OneSource in August of 2022. So I stayed for about two and a half years post acquisition, and it was a great experience. I'm excited that I stayed, really setting up the team for the next phase of growth. But I think it was time for new leadership. Also, I had some health challenges in 2024. I had bilateral strabismus, had successful surgery in January, just a couple months ago, and it's getting me excited for new things. So, I'm leaving one thing, but starting some new things. I'll be doing some speaking, some board advising as I'm doing right now, and starting two new companies, which I'm excited about, not in pharma, something completely different.
Go on,
So I'll just
Tracy.
leave that as
Shameless plug. Go on. So
yeah. Well,
there's
I'm
a
gonna
few things
tease.
here.
Yeah, well, I'll just leave it at that. That's the little teaser. I'll be launching tracyrockney.com on May 1st, and so you can
Okay.
read more about what I'm doing. But yeah, I'm excited about this next phase in my life. Like I said, I've got a 16-year-old at home. My two grown children are married, and I've got grandchildren, if you can believe it. And they live in different parts of the country. So, and my husband and I, we both have our moms still. We both have moms that are in their 80s now. And so, I'm kind of that sandwich generation. It's really interesting of the responsibilities, but I'm excited for new things. I'm probably more energetic after having the year that I had in 2024 health wise to, not just sit down. I'm not one to retire. I think that word should be banned from my vocabulary because it's just not what I see. I mean, I love the process of learning new things. I like being uncomfortable. And I know people probably find that a little bit weird, but I like being uncomfortable and being challenged to try new and different things and meet new and different people. So I'm excited about it. And I know whatever I do, it will be successful. I have it on my vision board right on the side of the room. I write down my goals, I put a price on them, and I achieve them. And so I'm excited to travel more, just get out physically, and hopefully, by the end of the year, I'll be doing some half marathons again. So just really excited about life in general, and looking forward to mentoring more female leaders, and I'll be doing a lot of that because
So Tracy,
yeah.
if there was a female leader listening right now,
Hmm.
or in fact, what advice, if you're going to give two and two only big pieces of advice for the female leader listening, what advice would you give them?
I'd say
I'm
first
going to
off,
be strict on the two.
okay, on two. First of all, take opportunities before you think you're ready for them. Okay. Women have, I think, really make a big mistake a lot of times when they're being offered opportunities for promotion and they're the first ones to always say, I don't think I'm ready yet. Yes, you are. And even if you're not perfectly ready, no one's ever perfectly ready. Go for it. That's the first thing. And I think then the second thing is be careful what you ask for. You might get it. I see a lot of women not asking for what they want. And then when somebody else gets the opportunity, I was the first one to always say to a lot of people, they would get upset and they're like, well, but they got it. I'm like, because they asked for it. You need to ask for it. Be clear, be intentional, and don't look for just mentors. Let me give you your third one. Look for advocates. Okay. Mentors are great to help you one on one. And sometimes someone's a mentor to you and they don't even know that you're mentoring them. Okay. That's fine. But an advocate is someone who speaks up for you when they're in the room and you're not. And so you need to find advocates. I think that's so critical.
We'll say that it was a bonus one. I said I was going to be strict on 2, and you got the bonus one in there.
I did.
I'll let you off. Where can people follow your journey, find out more about what you're building next, stay in touch if they, if something's really resonated with them today? How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, like I said, on May 1st, I'll be launching tracyrockney.com, and you'll be able to then hook up with me. I'll have my updated email address. I will have LinkedIn. They can get a hold of me on LinkedIn today, but it'll be on Twitter and on Instagram. So, yeah, really super excited. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk on this topic.
Thank you so much for your time, Tracy. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you the last few calls and on the podcast, and we really appreciate your insight.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to Leaders of Life Sciences. We hope you're leaving with fresh ideas and inspiration to lead with clarity and purpose. If you're hiring, building your leadership team, or thinking about your next move, we'd love to support you. You'll find everything you need to get in touch in the show notes. And if you enjoyed the show, please follow and share it with someone who'd find it valuable. Until next time, keep leading forward.